John and Charlie watched as Marla ascended. So the trapdoor there, John pointed up at it. The trapdoor of this hallway is right next to Freddy's. That will get us onto the roof of Freddy's, which is under the roof of the mall in a crawl space. And on Freddy's roof, there's a skylight which we'll find while crawling through the crawl space. He drew an invisible diagram in the air with his finger as he spoke, and his tone was edged with skepticism. Charlie did not respond. Marla's footsteps on a ladder sounded through the mall. Heavy, tiny thuds that echoed unsteadily all around them. Once we find the skylight in the crawl space, John went on, not certain if Charlie was even listening, we are going to drop down through the skylight and into Freddy's, possibly with no way of getting back out. At the top of the ladder, Marla fiddled with something in the ceiling that the others could not see, making little mutters of frustration. Is it locked? Charlie called up. Okay, sure, John said, aware by now that he was talking only to himself. This makes sense. The bolt is just stuck, Marla said. I need, ha! A dull snapping sound rang out. Got it, she cried. She raised her hands over her head and pressed onward, and slowly the door opened above her until it tipped over and fell with a thud. So much for sneaking in, John said drearily. It doesn't matter, Charlie said. We still have to go. Besides, do you really think whoever is in there doesn't know we're coming? Above them, Marla was navigating her way up through the door. She embraced her arms on either side of the space and pushed off the ladder. It swayed dangerously, and Lamar and Jessica clutched it, trying to stabilize it, but it was not necessary. Marla was already up through and on the roof. They waited for her to say something. Marla, Jessica called finally. Yeah, I'm fine, Marla said. What do you see? Charlie called. Throw me the light. Marla's arm emerged from the trapdoor, flopping impatiently. Lamar got a bit closer and carefully locked the flashlight up. Marla snatched it out of the air and immediately the beam vanished. The light had gone out. In the crawl space, Marla sat in the dark trying to fix the flashlight. She shook it, rattling the batteries, and flipped the switch on and off uselessly. As she unscrewed the top of the light and blew it into the battery cage, she felt a rising panic. She realized, since realizing Jason had gone, Marla's entire being had been focused on him. It was only now, alone in the darkness, that she began to think about the danger she herself might be in. She screwed the top back onto the flashlight and it came on instantly. The light flashed into her eyes, briefly clouding her vision. She pointed it away, then carefully swept it in a circle around her, revealing a spiraling void in all directions. It was the roof of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. What do you see? Charlie called again. You were right. There's space, but not much. It's so dark and it smells awful up here. Her voice sounded shaky even to her own ears, and suddenly she was desperate not to be alone in this place. Hurry, don't leave me up here by myself. We're coming, Jessica called up to her. Me next, Charlie said, stepping forward. The ladder was rusty and it made squeaky complaints as she climbed, protesting her weight as she moved from step to step. But it felt sturdy, and quickly she reached the trapdoor and did it as Marla had done. She stood on the top step head so she was head and shoulders through the door, braced her arms on either side and pushed off the ladder, almost jumping, to land on Freddy's roof. There was no room to stand, scarcely room to sit. The space between the restaurant's roof and the mall's roof above it was less than a yard. Something was rattling above them, as if stones were falling overhead, and it took Charlie a moment to realize it was the rain thundering on an uninsulated tin. Water dripped into her head, and then she looked up. She saw a place where the metal seams had not been jointed. Two corrugated sheets simply lined up next to each other, aligned by circumstance. She wiped her palms on her jeans. The shingles of the roof were wet, and her hands were covered in grit and dust, and something slick and more unpleasant. She looked toward Marla, who was a few feet away. Here, come on, get out of their way, Marla said, motioning her over, and Charlie hurried on her hands and knees. Jessica's head appeared in the trapdoor, and carefully she made her way up into the crawl space, safely on the roof. Jessica looked around as if gagging something, concerned. Charlie remembered her fear in the air vent, but Jessica took a long, deep breath. I can handle this, she said, though she did not sound as if she believed her own words. A moment later, Lamar was next to them. He quickly reclaimed the flashlight and aimed it backward toward the trapdoor. After a moment, John scrambled up into the crawl space and something banged loudly beneath them. The sound repeating. Everyone but John startled at the sound. Sorry, he said. That was the ladder. Charlie, which way? Marla asked. Oh. Charlie closed her eyes again, retraced her steps as she had done while they searched for a way in. Straight across, I think, she said. As long as we get to the far side, we'll find it. Without waiting for responses, she started crawling in the direction she thought was right. A second later, light appeared ahead of her. Things, she called back softly to Lamar, who was steadying the flashlight, trying to anticipate where Charlie would go. I don't have anything else to do, he whispered. The crawl space was wide. It felt spacious, but there were support beams and pipes strewn at random, intercepting the space or running across the roof below them so that it was a little like navigating a very cramped forest. Ducking vines and climbing over fallen trees, the roof of Freddy's had a shallow upward slope. They would have to go down again since they reached the middle. The shingles beneath their hands and feet were soggy in a deep, swollen way that suggested they had not been truly dry in years, and a moldy smell rose from them. Every once in a while, Charlie wiped her hands on her pants, knowing they'll only be clean for a moment. From time to time, she thought she heard something scattered by. Sounds like a little too far away to be coming from the group, but she ignored them. They have more right to be more than we do, she thought, though she was not certain what species they might be. The roof above them followed a bizarre pattern, sloping up and down without regard into the roof beneath, so that at one point it opened 4 feet above their heads, then another plunged downward so close that it grazed their backs, forcing them to duck their heads and wriggle awkwardly through. Jessica was right behind Charlie, and from time to time she could hear her friend make soft, frightened noises. But every time she looked back, Jessica was nodded, stone faced. They continued until they reached the wall that marked the edge of the roof. Okay, Charlie called, half turning behind her. It should be here. It should be near here. Let's spread out and look. No, wait, what's that? Marla said, pointing. Charlie could not see where Marla had spotted, but she followed the direction until she came to it. The skylight was a flat glass pane on the roof frame, like a small window. A single panel with no visible handles, hinges, or latches. They leaned over it, trying to see into the room below, but the glass was too covered in grime for anything to show through. John reached forward and tried to clean it with his sleeve. He came away with the arm of his shirt black, but it had done no good. At least half the dirt was on the other side, and the skylight was still a pock with filth. It's just a closet. It's okay, Charlie said. But is anyone in the closet? Lamar said. It doesn't matter, said Marla. We don't have a choice. Everyone looked at Charlie, who thoughtfully studied the skylight. It swings in, she said. You pull down on this side, she pointed, and it swings. There's a latch on the inside, right here. She touched the side of the skylight, thinking, maybe if she pushed it and it gave way almost instantly, jolting her with a sudden panicked sense of falling, even though her weight was solidly on the roof. That's kind of narrow, John said. The skylight did not open all the way. The glass just tilted inward a little, barely enough for a person to slip through. I didn't build it, Charlie said, slightly irritated. This is it, so if you're going, go. Without waiting for a response, she swung her legs over the sill and lowered herself down, dangling for a moment in the dark. Closing her eyes and hoping the floor was not as far away as she remembered, she let go and fell. She landed. The shock of impact ran through her legs, but it passed quickly. Bend your knees when you land, she called out as she got out of the way. Marla jumped through, and Charlie went to the door trying to find a light switch. Her fingers stumbled across the switch, and she flipped it up. The old fluorescent lights clicked and buzzed, and then slowly a dim and unreliable glow filled the space. All right, she whispered with a thrill of excitement. She turned around, and as something brushed her face, she had a fleeting impression of big plastic eyes and broken yellow teeth. She screamed and leaped back, clutching for balance at shelves that swayed as she grabbed them. The head she had touched an uncovered white frame for a costume with nothing but eyes and teeth to decorate it. Wobbled precariously on the shelf beside Charlie, then fell to the ground. Her heart still pounding, Charlie brushed at herself roughly as if she covered in spider webs. Her legs unsteady as she moved back and forth with agitation. The head rolled across the floor, then came to a rest at her feet, looking up at her with its cheerful, sinister smile. Charlie drew back from the ghastly grin, and something grabbed her from behind. She tried to yank free, but she was stuck. A pair of metal arms wrapped around her. The bodiless limbs clung to her shirt, their hinges biting into the cloth, and as she tried to wrest herself away, her hair was caught, too, tangling her deeper into the wire until she felt like she would be consumed. Charlie screamed again, and the arms reached out farther, seeming to grow as she struggled against them. She fought back with all her strength, fueled by terror and a base, frantic fury that this thing would hurt her. Charlie, stop! Mala cried. Charlie! Mala grabbed her arm, trying to stop her frantic movement, using one hand to disengage Charlie's hair from the metal frame. Charlie, it's not real, it's just robot parts, she said, but Charlie pulled away from Mala, still in a panic, and smacked her head into the cardboard box. She cried out, startled, as the box overturned. Eyes the size of fists fell into the ground like rain, showering down with a clatter and rolling everywhere, covering the floor. Charlie stumbled and stepped on one of the hard plastic orbs, sending her feet out from under her. She grabbed at a shelf, missed, and fell on her back, landing with a thud that took the wind out of her. Stunned and gasping, she looked up. There were eyes everywhere, not just on the floor, but on the walls. They looked at her from the dark, deep-socketed, shadowed eyes peering down from the shelves all around her. She stared, unable to look away. Charlie, come on. Mother was there, kneeling anxiously over her. She grabbed Charlie's arm again and pulled until Charlie was upright. Charlie still did not have her breath back, and as she inhaled thinly, she began to cry. Mother hugged her tightly, and Charlie let her. It's okay, Mother whispered as Charlie tried to calm herself, looking around the storeroom for distraction. It's not real, she told herself. They weren't in a storeroom, just a closet, and these were all spare parts. The air was thick with dust, and it tickled at her nose and throat as it poured off the shelves restlessly. The rest of the group dropped through the skylight one by one. John came last, landing in the middle of the room with a thump. Jessica sneezed. You okay? John said as soon as she saw Charlie. Yeah, I'm fine. Charlie disentangled herself from Mala and crossed her arms, still collecting herself. You know, we can't go back up there, John said, looking up at the skylight. We just need something to stand on, Charlie said, or we can climb a shelf. Jessica shook her head. No, look at the way it's open. Charlie looked. The skylight opened downward, so the pane of glass sloped at a gentle angle just enough to have them let through. To get out, they would have to. Oh, she said. There will be no getting out. However close they got to the skylight, the pane of glass will always be in the way, sticking out into the precise space they needed to pass through. If anyone tried to get a grip on the roof, they would have had to land so far over the glass that they would fall from the ladder. We might be able to break the glass, John started, but the metal frame is going to be dangerous to climb over, even more dangerous with shards of broken glass. He fell silent and thought it through again, his face grim. It doesn't matter, Charlie said. We'll find another way out. Let's start looking. They peered cautiously out into the hallway. Lamar had turned off the flashlight, but it was easy enough to see the surroundings now, with the light from the closet seeping into the hall. At least nothing's dripping from the ceiling, Charlie thought, flipping her hands on her pants again. The floor was black and white tile, as glossy as if it would just been polished. There are children's drawings on the walls, rustling in the air from the open skylight. Charlie remained motionless, more than aware of how much noise she had just made. Does it know we're here? She wondered, realizing as she did that by it, she meant the building itself. It felt as if Phrase was conscious in their presence, as if it reacted to them like a living, breathing thing. She reached out to brush her fingers against its wall, tracing lightly as if she were petting it. The plaster was still cold and inanimate, and Charlie pulled her hand back. She wondered what Phrase would do. They wound around one corner, then another, and then stopped at the entrance to Pirate's Cove. Hanging back from the doorway, Pirate's Cove, I have my bearings again. Charlie gazed at the little stage, no longer lit, and the curtain had hit its sole performer. A few small lights flickered on the side of the stage, then to come on, illuminating the space with a pale gray glow. Charlie looked around and saw Lamar standing by the doorway with his hands on a switch. We don't have a choice, he said defensively, gesturing to his flashlight. Its light was failing. Charlie nodded resolutely, and Lamar switched off the dying flashlight. I want to take a look in this control room, Marla said, pointing to the small door nearby. Lamar, come with me. Through Sevilla tried the other one. If we each take one set of cameras, we can see the whole restaurant. If Jason's in this place, we'll see him. I don't think we should split up, Charlie said. Wait, said Lamar. He passed on the dead light, freeing his hands. From his pockets, he produced two walkie-talkies. They were large, black boxy things Charlie had only seen attached to police officers' belts. Where did you get those? She asked. Lamar smiled mysteriously. I'm afraid I can't tell you that, he said. He stole them from Carlton's house, Jessica stated plainly, taking one from his hand and examining it. No, they were in the garage. Mrs. Burke told me where to find them. They work. I tested. Mrs. Burke know we were coming here? Charlie thought. Marla just nodded. Maybe she had already known, or maybe nothing could surprise her anymore. Come on, Marla said, and walked between the tables in front of Pirate's Cove, careful not to disturb anything. Lamar leaned over Jessica to show her how to use the walkie-talkie. It's this button, he said, indicating it, and then he took off after Marla. After a startled moment, the rest of them followed. Something clutched in Charlie's stomach, the reality that both Jason and Carlton might truly be in danger, seizing her. It was not that she had forgotten, but while they were outside trying to solve the puzzles, it was possible to gain some distance from what was happening. She watched Marla stalking toward the control room with a bleak authority. Marla crouched at the small door before turning to Charlie. Go, she said, nodding toward the hall that led to the main dining area. They went, Charlie taking the lead as they crept down the hall, heading for the main stage. Marla looked at Lamar, who nodded. She grasped the doorknob, clenched her teeth, and forced the door open all in one motion. Marla! Marla jumped, barely suppressing a scream. Jason was huddled in a space between the monitors, his eyes wide and terrified, staring at the door like a frightened mouse. Jason! Marla crawled into the control room and swooped him into her arms. Jason hugged her back, for once grateful, even desperate for her intense affection. She held on tight, crushing him into her until he began to worry that he might in fact be crushed. From outside Marla's consuming embrace, Jason heard brief static. He looked over Marla's shoulder to see Lamar studying the walkie-talkie, preparing to speak to it. Jessica, we found him, he said. More static and words Jason did not quite catch came from the radio. The first wave of relief had worn off, and his ribs were starting to hurt. Marla? He tapped her on the shoulder, first gently, then harder. Marla. She let him go, but took hold of his shoulders for a moment. Peering into his eyes as if it were to be sure it was really him, and he had not been somehow replaced or irrevocably damaged. Marla, cool it, he said as casually as he could, managing to keep his voice from shaking. Marla let go of his shoulders, giving him a playful shove, and began to scold him as she pulled him the rest of the way up from under the control panel. Jason, how could you? Marla was interrupted as Lamar descended the rest of the way into the small room. Through the vent, really? Lamar laughed. You could have been killed crawling through the air duct like that, Marla added, grasping his shoulders. Jason flapped free, flailing his arms until she let him go. Okay, he exclaimed. Everybody missed me. Good. Glad to know I'm important. You are important, Marla said forcefully, and Jason rolled his eyes theatrically. The little room lit up as Lamar flipped the switch, bringing the screens to life. Marla looked at Jason thoughtfully, then turned her attention to the security cameras. Okay, let's see what we can see. Lamar looked from screen to screen. The top middle screen showed the main dining room and a stage, and as they watched, Charlie and Jessica and John appeared, crossing the room in a V formation. Charlie at the front. Look, Marla said suddenly, pointing to the screen at the lower right. Look. The nightgown was there, though they could not make out his face. His baggy uniform and sagging shoulders told them that it was the same man. He was in the hall near the restaurant's entrance, walking past the bar rooms and the arcade with a slow, purposeful gait. Lamar, warn them. Marla ordered gently. Lamar spoke into the walkie-talkie. Jessica, the guard is somewhere around here. Hide. There is no response from the radio, but on screen, the group of three froze. Then, as one, they made for the control room under the stage, squeezing in and closing themselves in just as the guard appeared in the doorway. Voices. People moving around. Carlton did not allow himself into sight in relief. A rescue wouldn't do him any good if he got his insides punctured by 100 tiny robot parts first. Instead, he continued to what he had been doing, inching his way across the floor and into the view of the security camera that perched near the ceiling just above the door. Each movement was so scarce and felt like nothing, but he had been doing this for over an hour and he was almost there. He kept his breathing steady, using his strapped hands to lift his body a tiny bit, move to the side, and then lay himself down again, just a little further to the right. His fingers were cramped and his head still ached, but he kept going, relentless. Although he was still afraid, still painfully aware of how easily he could trigger his own death, at some point the fear had dulled, or perhaps he had just become accustomed to it. Panic could not last forever. Eventually, the adrenaline had run out. Now, at least, the need for slow, precise movement took precedence over everything else. It was all there was. Carlton made one final movement and stopped, closing his eyes for a moment. He had made it. Can't stop now. The others were here. It had to be them. And if they were looking for him, they would check the cameras. He stared into the lens, willing himself to be seen. He could not wave or jump up and down. He tried walking back and forth a little, but no matter how stiffly he held himself, he felt the press of Springlegs ready to give. He bit his lip in frustration. Just see me, he whispered to no one, but all at once he felt as if he had been heard, felt the inflexible sense of someone else's presence in the room. His heart began to race again, the adrenaline that had given out finding its second wind. Carefully, slowly, he looked around until something caught his eye. It was only one of the costumes, slumped empty into the shadows, half hidden in a corner of the room. It was motionless, but its face was pointed directly at him, staring. As Carlton looked back, he realized that deep within the recess of the costume's eye sockets were two tiny glints of light. He felt little muscles twitch, a restrained shudder running through his body, not quite enough to get him killed. He did not look away. As Carlton held the creature's gaze, he felt himself begin to calm, his heart's pounding ease and his breath grew even. It was though suddenly he was safe, though he knew the suit he was wearing was still only one flinch, one startled jump from killing him. Carlton kept looking at these two pinpoints of light, and as he did, he heard a voice. And I guess being instant, all the air was sucked from his lungs as the voice spoke. That voice he would have known anywhere. That voice he would have given anything to hear again. Carlton began to weep, using all his will to keep his body from shaking. The eyes in the dark were intent on his face as the voice went on, speaking secrets to Carlton in the ringing silence, telling him things that he dreaded, things that someone had to hear.